That's mine.
Standing proud in the countryside of Monmouthshire, southern Wales, Raglan Castle survives today as one of the best preserved and extensive castles in Britain. And, while clearly a beautiful romantic ruin, this castle tells a dark tale about the realities of the English Civil War and its effect on grand buildings such as this. Raglan most likely started life as a classic motte and bailey built by the first Norman Earl of Hereford named William Fitz-Osbern, shortly after the Norman conquest of 1066 and the subsequent invasion of Wales that followed in 1067. Fitz-Osbern was a close friend of William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, and was generously rewarded for his help with the invasion of England, being awarded lands in 6 or more counties, including Herefordshire, Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. William Fitz-Osbern was quick to establish himself as a keen castle builder, building grand Norman castles all over England, such as Chepstow on the River Wye and Carisbrooke in the Isle of Wight, as well as many others. After the Norman invasion of Wales, Fitz-Osbern was called upon for help in Flanders, where he was promised rich titles and lands in Normandy for his assistance. However, he was unfortunately slain at the Battle of Cassel in 1070 AD. Before his death, however, he managed to establish 2 castles in Monmouthshire named Monmouth Castle and Raglan. Raglan saw little military action for the first few centuries of its life, so the construction work turned the castle more into a grand hall, becoming a place more suited for deer hunting and holidaying more than combat. But the dominating structure we see today is largely thanks to Sir William ap Thomas, who purchased the manor of Raglan in 1432, where he had already been living as a tenant. Evidently, he fell in love with the building, and after purchasing the manor for 1,000 marks, which in today's money would be worth just over £1 million, he began a vast construction project, extending the castle's footprint extensively throughout his life. Over time, William gained prominence with his support of the House of York and decided to drop the Welsh part of his name, now becoming known as William Herbert. He took part in the 100 Years' War and made his fortune over in France from the Gascon wine trade, where he used the money to further remodel his favourite home of Raglan. While being heavily involved with English politics, he was also much loved by his Welsh counterparts, who renowned him for being the first Welshman to be made an Earl, and saw him as a possible figurehead to push for the independence of Wales. However, of course, this never came to be. Regardless, it is understood that Raglan's architectural construction offers some hints which pay homage to William Herbert's Welsh roots, with the iconic octagonal towers possibly being a tip of the hat to the towers of Carnarvon Castle in northern Wales, one of the most grand fortresses in all of Britain. As money continued to flow in from William's fortunes, Raglan continued to be built upon and improved. By the late 1460s, the castle boasted extensive deer parks, orchards, fish ponds, and ever-increasingly splendourous furniture in the castle's numerous grand halls, galleries and chambers. After the Yorkist defeat at the Battle of Edgecote in 1469, also known as the Battle of Banbury in Oxfordshire, William Herbert was captured and subsequently executed for his support to the House of York. This caused a brief stall in building work over at Raglan, however work recommenced less than a decade later. In 1492 the castle passed down to William's daughter Elizabeth Somerset, who had married Sir Charles Somerset, and hence began the castle's new development stage in the hands of the Somerset family. With the Somersets being supporters of the House of Lancaster, and particularly close to both King Henry VII and King Henry VIII, Charles became Earl of Worcester, and his son, named Henry Somerset, was able to claim lead from the roof of the nearby monastic giant Tintern Abbey on the Wye Valley shortly after the dissolution of the monasteries. This lead was then used at Raglan during further development. However, Henry Somerset passed away shortly after this construction project began. After his death, various descendants were attributed with multiple remodelling of the existing features in the castle. William Somerset further developed the castle gardens, along with the grand gallery built in the new Renaissance style. Edward Somerset built an impressive moat walk around the castle grounds, making the estate's gardens a strong contender for some of the most extensive and beautiful in the entire country. And it was the new Henry Somerset who, upon inheriting the castle in 1628, worked alongside his son Edward, famously building the water commanding machine in the Great Tower, which was essentially an ingenious steam-propelled water fountain way beyond its day. It was, however, this Henry Somerset who bore witness to the cruel fate of Raglan Castle, which came hand in hand with Henry's untimely death. The 1640s were a tumultuous time in England's history. Tensions were growing between the King of England and Parliament. And in 1642, war was declared between the two sides, which tore Britain apart. Henry and his son were firm supporters of the Royalist cause, and welcomed a visit by King Charles's son who was touring Britain to raise funds for the war effort. Somerset knew that this hospitality to the King's son wouldn't go unnoticed by Parliament, and so he decided to modernise some of the defences around the castle. Earthwork bastions were built, along with a powder mill used for making gunpowder, and a garrison of 300 men were employed, all at the cost of around £40,000, which again in today's money would be around £7.5 million. Modern heavy cannons were placed around these earth bastions, with lighter cannons manning the walls and towers of the castle. Henry Somerset was prepared for war, and as he continued to host both King Charles and the Prince on multiple occasions over the following years, he knew that war was surely coming to his gates. Closely studying the war as it unfolded, the forward-thinking Somerset decided to preemptively export much of his finery, including oak panelling, decorated plaster ceiling, and various tapestries, to his brother's estate for safekeeping, and increased his personal household guard to 800 men. In the calm before the storm, Somerset even went to the extent of cutting down the trees in front of his castle to improve visibility, as well as ordering the demolition of all nearby buildings to prevent them from being used as shelter for the inevitable parliamentarian invasion. Almost every day, more Royalist forces, including many leaders, would arrive at the fearsome gates of Raglan Castle seeking shelter. This unfortunately caused much damage to the castle's interior, as the Somerset family could not keep all the new fugitives in check. Walls were demolished, doors removed, and expensive glass was smashed through, all to provide ease of access for the soldiers, their muskets, and their cannon, as a siege of the castle grew ever more inevitable. At the start of summer 1646, the first parliamentarian army arrived on the estate of Raglan. Cannon were soon set up and earthworks were dug. Terms of surrender were offered to Somerset, but were declined, and in June the first of many cannonballs were fired upon the castle. For 10 long weeks the castle was submitted to a lethal barrage of 18 to 20-pound cannonballs, which took out the library tower, some of the eastern wall, and various ornamental turrets. The castle walls soon became peppered in dents and cracks caused by the parliamentarian cannon fire, but they failed to penetrate Raglan's most prolific defence, the Yellow Tower, which was the castle's grand keep. Within a few weeks of the siege, parliamentarian military leader Thomas Fairfax wrote to Somerset, advising him that he is marching upon Raglan estate with an army equipped to the teeth for a formal siege, and again urged Somerset to surrender. This request was also turned down, with some accounts claiming that Somerset was particularly rude in his letter when discussing his disapproval of Fairfax arriving on his estate. Regardless, when the army of Thomas Fairfax arrived, they deployed their mortar cannons, which were ruthless in sending shrapnel raining down through the roofs of the various buildings inside Raglan Castle, where the Somerset family were staying. For 10 long weeks, Raglan Castle was submitted to the brutal siege, with every day bringing more destruction to both the castle and its extensive estate. By August, Somerset had submitted a mercy of Parliament, where he agreed to turn himself in for the protection of his family and the 700 surviving Royalist soldiers. At first, the Royalist defenders refused to lay down their arms for their host, swearing to fight for him until the end, but a heartfelt speech made by Somerset to the men convinced them to surrender. On August the 19th, 1646, Henry Somerset marched out of the main gates of Raglan Castle with 700 men by his side, and was arrested by the Parliamentarian army. Somerset was taken to Windsor Castle to serve out his imprisonment, but he died shortly after on the 18th of December. His sharp wit continued right up until his death, reportedly requesting Parliament that once he dies, he may be buried at Windsor Castle, so that he shall have a better castle in death than the castle Parliament took away from him in life. After the siege of Raglan, the castle was plundered for its valuables by the Parliamentarian soldiers. The books in the castle library, consisting of rare tomes and important Welsh documents, were either stolen or destroyed. Even the moat was dredged for treasure and the carp removed from the fish ponds. Once the grand castle was stripped bare of its finery, Thomas Fairfax ordered the complete demolition of Raglan, but due to the incredibly thick walls and sheer scale of the castle, the Parliamentarians didn't have enough gunpowder or dynamite to complete the job. So instead, the castle was just partially blown up, with the Yellow Tower mined from underneath, so that a section of the wall crumbles and falls down, in a process called slighting. This destruction was both to prevent the castle from being used as a defensive structure for any future conflicts, and also to send a message to other Royalist sympathisers who may wish to use their stately homes as fortresses against Parliament. And so Raglan Castle was left to ruin, a cruel reminder of the chaos and hatred that occurred during the English Civil War, and, like so many other British castles that suffered the same fate, marks the end of medieval castle building forevermore.